Arthur Vance was 48 years old. For 22 of those years, he had loved one woman, Alara. He had built their life with the same patience he used to join dovetails. Each piece fitted perfectly, sanded smooth until the seams were invisible to the naked eye. He built the house they lived in, the chairs they sat on, the bed they slept in. His love was a tangible thing, expressed in the grain of walnut and the integrity of a well-made joint. Then a single-line item on a credit card statement introduced a flaw, a knot in the wood he could not sand away or ignore. It was a charge from a place called the Sycamore Inn, 200 miles away in Bristol, on a day she was supposed to be showing a local property. He placed the phone call at 2:17 in the afternoon. He clutched his chest, letting the phone fall from his hand to the floor with a clatter he knew she would hear. He described the classic symptoms, the radiating pain down his left arm, the shortness of breath, the pressure that felt like a vice. He had called his neighbor first, a retired nurse named Martha, establishing a witness to his distress. He told Martha he was calling Alara. He spoke to his wife, his voice tight with a carefully manufactured panic. "I think it's my heart," he said, the words catching in his throat. "I'm on the floor." Then he hung up and waited. What he did during the 6 hours she did not arrive would dismantle a life and expose a conspiracy of devastating precision. Let us know in the comments where you are watching from, and be sure to subscribe for more stories of justice served. 3 months before that call, Arthur's life had a rhythm as predictable and comforting as the turning of his lathe. His days began before dawn, with the smell of coffee and sawdust. His workshop was a sanctuary of order, a place where every tool had its place and every action had a clear and measurable consequence. A chisel, sharpened to a razor's edge, would peel away a perfect curl of maple. A saw, guided by a steady hand, would cut a line so true it felt like a law of physics. He was a man who believed in the honesty of materials. Wood did not lie. It showed its stress, its weaknesses, its history in its very grain. For years, he had believed his marriage was like that, a thing of substance and beauty, built to last from the finest, most reliable stock. He saw Alara's world of real estate as the necessary counterpoint to his own. She was motion and negotiation. He was stillness and creation. She moved through rooms of glass and steel, selling futures, while he worked with his hands to honor the past. He admired her energy, the quickness of her mind, the way she could command a room with a smile. He did not recognize her ambition as a form of hunger that could never be sated. He saw only the vibrant, captivating woman he had met at a local gallery, the one who had claimed to love the quiet strength in his hands. The house he built for them stood on 3 acres of wooded land, a testament to this belief. Every beam was hand-fitted, every cabinet custom-built, every piece of trim mitered with an artisan's obsessive care. It was a house made of promises, a physical manifestation of his commitment. But lately, small inconsistencies had begun to appear, like hairline cracks in a finish. Her phone, once left casually on the kitchen counter, was now always with her, its screen angled away from his view. There were more client dinners that stretched late into the night, more weekends spent at industry conferences he was not invited to attend. He had registered these details as isolated data points, not as a pattern. He was a man who looked for structural integrity, and from a distance, the structure of their life still appeared sound. He had not yet learned to look for the rot that can begin from the inside out. The credit card statement arrived on a Wednesday, tucked between a woodworking catalog and a utility bill. It was a joint account, but the finances were his domain, another part of the life he managed with quiet competence. He sat at the kitchen island, a place he had built from a single slab of reclaimed oak, and ran his finger down the column of charges. A grocery bill, a payment for gasoline, the monthly subscription for their streaming service. And then, the anomaly. The Sycamore Inn, Bristol. The charge was for one night, for a deluxe room. The date was a Tuesday, 3 weeks prior. His mind, trained to recall detail and sequence, immediately reconstructed that day. Tuesday, Alara had a major showing. A sprawling contemporary home in Northwood, a wealthy suburb just 20 minutes away. She had been excited, animated, talking through her strategy over breakfast. She wore a navy blue suit he had always liked, the one that made her eyes seem even brighter. She had come home late that night, well after he had finished in the workshop. She was tired but claimed the day was a success, that the clients, a wealthy couple from out of state, were on the verge of making a multi-million-dollar offer. She had kissed him, her lips cool, and complained about the traffic on the Crosstown Freeway. Bristol was not on the Crosstown Freeway. It was a 4-hour drive in the opposite direction. The discrepancy was not a simple mistake. It was a foundational lie, a support beam cut clean through. He felt a pressure build behind his sternum, a real and unwelcome sensation that was a grim foreshadowing of the pain he would later fake. He did not confront her. That was not his way. A direct question would only be met with a well-constructed facade, and Alara was a master at building facades. He folded the statement, placed it back in the envelope, and filed it away in his office. The doubt was no longer a fleeting thought. It was now a tool on his workbench, cold and heavy in his hand. He began to observe his life not as a participant, but as a forensic architect, searching for the source of the failure. The weeks that followed were a study in controlled observation. Arthur moved through his days with the same deliberate pace, his demeanor unchanged. He planed wood, sanded surfaces, and applied finishes in his workshop, the familiar routines a balm to his fractured sense of order. But his awareness was heightened, his senses tuned to a new and painful frequency. He noticed the small things, the details that now formed a damning mosaic. The scent of a man's cologne, sharp and unfamiliar, clinging to her wool coat one evening when she came home from a networking event, the way she would end a phone call abruptly if he entered the room, her voice shifting from intimate murmur to brisk professionalism. The new password on her laptop, a device that had once been opened between them. He inventoried these facts without comment. He stored them away, each one a carefully measured piece of a puzzle he did not want to solve. He felt a quiet grief settle in his chest, a constant, low-grade ache. It was not a storm of emotion. It was a slow, encroaching fog, blurring the landscape of his marriage. He knew, with the certainty of a craftsman who understands his materials, that the structure was compromised beyond repair. But he needed to know the extent of the damage. He needed to understand the full scope of the betrayal before he could begin the demolition. A simple accusation of infidelity felt insufficient. It would lead to a war of words, to denials and counter-accusations. She would reframe it, manage it, control the narrative. He needed something absolute, a test that would strip away all artifice and reveal the unvarnished truth. He needed a scenario that would compel an innocent person, a loving spouse, to drop everything. A life-or-death emergency. The idea of faking a heart attack felt grotesque, a violation of some sacred trust. But he reasoned that the trust was already broken. He was merely measuring the break. He planned it with the same meticulous care he would use to design a piece of furniture. He researched the symptoms online. He chose a day and a time, a Thursday afternoon when he knew she was scheduled to have a long strategy meeting with her primary business partner, a developer named Marcus Thorne. He prepared his stage. The day before, he mentioned to his neighbor, Martha, that he had been feeling some chest pains, a bit of shortness of breath. He was laying a foundation, ensuring the story would hold. The call was made at 2:17 p.m. He let the phone drop, listened to it clatter on the hardwood floor he had installed himself. He lay on his back, eyes closed, and regulated his breathing. He had rehearsed this. He heard Martha's hurried footsteps on his front porch, then her key in the lock, the spare he had given her for emergencies. Her presence was crucial, an anchor for his timeline. She knelt beside him, her old nurse's hands cool on his forehead. Her concern was real, and he felt a pang of guilt for deceiving this kind woman. He told her his story, the sudden, crushing pain, the call to Alara. He assured her that Alara was on her way, that she would be there any minute. He asked Martha to please wait outside, to watch for her car, so she could let her in immediately. It was a way to get her out of the house, while keeping her as a witness to the passing of time. As soon as Martha closed the front door behind her, Arthur stood up. The house was unnaturally silent. He walked not to the phone to call for an ambulance he didn't need, but to his office. He sat down at his desk, the screen of his computer glowing in the dim afternoon light. He began to work. With a cold, methodical calm, he logged into their shared financial accounts. He moved with an efficiency born of purpose. He downloaded years of bank statements, credit card records, investment portfolios, and mortgage documents. He saved everything to a series of encrypted hard drives. The ticking clock on his wall was not a source of panic. It was a metronome, marking the measure of his wife's indifference. 1 hour passed. The sun shifted, and a beam of light fell across a photograph on his desk, the two of them, younger, smiling on a beach. He felt nothing. 2 hours. He started to see the pattern. Large, unexplained cash withdrawals, always made on Fridays. A series of payments to a holding company he had never heard of, Thorn Properties LLC. 3 hours. He picked up his personal cell phone and called his older brother, David, an accountant whose mind worked in spreadsheets and balance sheets. "I need you to run a name for me," Arthur said, his voice level. He gave him the name of the holding company. He gave him Marcus Thorn's name. "Look for any connection. And be discreet for hours." The shadows in the house grew long and distorted. The silence was no longer just an absence of sound. It was a presence, heavy and suffocating. He thought about Alara, about where she might be, what she might be doing. He imagined her phone buzzing with his message, her looking at it, and making a choice. 5 hours. David called back. His voice was grim. Thorn Properties LLC was registered to one person, Marcus Thorn. Its primary asset was a newly purchased lakefront property in Bristol. An undeveloped lot, paid for in cash 3 weeks ago. 6 hours. He heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. He looked at the clock. It was 8:23 p.m., 6 hours and 6 minutes after his call for help. He moved from the office back to the living room, arranging himself on the sofa. He closed his eyes, feigning a depleted, fragile exhaustion. He heard her keys in the lock, the familiar sound now alien and grating. The front door opened and closed. He heard her drop her briefcase on the floor. Then she was standing over him. "Arthur? Oh my God, what happened?" Her voice was a performance of alarm, pitched a little too high. There was no frantic panic, no sign of a desperate race to his side. Her expression, when he opened his eyes to look at her, was one of carefully curated concern. He saw her mind working, assessing the scene, calculating her response. "My phone died," she said, the words coming quickly. "I was in back-to-back meetings all afternoon in a dead zone. I just got your message a little while ago. I came as fast as I could." It was a plausible lie, a story constructed to cover the gap in time. But it was 6 hours late. He watched her as she spoke. He noted the slight tremor in her hand as she reached out to touch his forehead. He saw the way her eyes darted around the room, never quite settling on his. She was reading from a script she had written on the drive home. She asked about the ambulance, about the doctors. He gave her an answer that would close the loop, an explanation that would require no further action on her part. "The paramedics came," he said, his voice intentionally weak. "Martha called them. They said it was a severe panic attack, brought on by stress." He watched her seize the narrative he offered. Relief washed over her face, a genuine emotion amidst the performance. A panic attack was manageable. It was a problem of his, not of hers. "Oh, Arthur," she said, her voice softening with practiced sympathy. "You've been working too hard. We need to get away. We'll take a vacation, just the two of us. We'll go somewhere warm." She was already rewriting their future, papering over the 6-hour chasm with promises of sunshine and rest. He did not challenge her. He did not ask why she hadn't tried to call back from another phone, or why she hadn't broken every speed limit to get to the side of the man she had promised to love in sickness and in health. He simply nodded, allowing her to believe her story had been accepted. He let her believe she was still in control. The silence in the room was filled with everything she was not saying. It was filled with the truth of her choice, a choice measured in 6 hours and 6 minutes. The next morning, the fiction of their life resumed. Alara played the part of the attentive, caring wife with unsettling skill. She made him breakfast, fluffing his pillows, speaking in the hushed, gentle tones one uses with an invalid. She insisted he stay home from the workshop, that he needed to rest. Arthur moved through the charade, a ghost in his own home. He was polite, passive, allowing her to manage him. But his mind was a world away, in a cold, clear space of calculation. He had the raw data from the night before, a chaotic collection of numbers and names downloaded in a state of adrenaline-fueled focus. Now he needed to give it structure, to understand its full meaning. That afternoon, while Alara was out showing a property, a real one, this time, he confirmed, he made 2 calls. The first was to a lawyer his brother had recommended, a man known for his forensic approach to divorce cases. The second call, on the lawyer's advice, was to a private investigator. The investigator was a former police detective, a man named Corrigan who spoke in short, declarative sentences and asked no unnecessary questions. Arthur's instructions were precise. He did not want photographs of clandestine meetings in cheap motels. He was not interested in the sordid details of the affair itself. He wanted a financial trail. He wanted a timeline of her movements and communications, specifically her interactions with Marcus Thorne. He wanted to understand the architecture of their deception. While Corrigan began his work, Arthur retreated to his workshop, not to build, but to deconstruct. He spread the financial documents across his largest assembly table, the smooth maple surface normally reserved for blueprints and delicate inlay work. He began to trace the flow of money. It was more extensive than he had imagined. For nearly 2 years, Alara and Marcus had been systematically siphoning funds from their joint investment accounts. The process was sophisticated. Small, regular withdrawals that would not trigger alerts, transferred into a series of intermediary accounts before finally landing in the Thorne Properties LLC holding company. They were using his life savings, the wealth he had patiently accumulated through decades of hard, honest labor, as their seed capital. They were building a new life with the materials of his old one. The final, most cutting discovery came from a file buried deep on their shared cloud server, a folder mislabeled Old Tax Docs. Inside were not tax documents, but architectural plans. A blueprint for a sleek, modernist house of glass and steel, designed to be built on a lakeside plot of land. The client name on the plans was Thorne Properties LLC. The address of the plot matched the one his brother had found, the one in Bristol. He stared at the drawings, at the cold, impersonal lines that stood in stark opposition to the warm, handcrafted home he had built for them. The betrayal was not just emotional and financial. It was aesthetic, it was philosophical. They were stealing his past to build a future that was a complete and utter rejection of everything he was. Weeks turned into a month. Life in the Vance household continued its placid, surface-level routine. Alara remained the doting wife, her performance of concern unwavering. She suggested therapists, yoga retreats, anything to address his stress, never once suspecting that his quietness was not a symptom of anxiety, but of a grim and gathering certainty. Arthur played his part, his emotional control so absolute that she mistook it for passivity. She had always underestimated his stillness, seeing it as a lack of drive rather than a reservoir of strength. Every few days, a plain manila envelope would arrive for Arthur at the post office box he had rented. Corrigan's reports. They were models of economy, devoid of emotion or speculation. They contained only facts, timestamps, addresses, photographs taken from a distance, grainy and irrefutable. Alara and Marcus having lunch at a downtown bistro, their heads close together in conversation. Alara's car parked overnight in the driveway of Marcus's suburban home. Alara and Marcus walking the empty lot in Bristol, pointing towards the lake. Alara and Marcus leaving an architect's firm, a roll of blueprints under his arm. Each report was another piece of kiln-dried hardwood, straight and true, that Arthur used to build his case. One night, he could not sleep. He went to his workshop, the familiar scent of wood and oil a small comfort in the disorienting new landscape of his life. Under the stark light of a single overhead lamp, he laid everything out on his main workbench. He arranged the documents in chronological order, a timeline of deceit. He began with the first credit card statement, the one that had exposed the initial lie. He followed it with the bank records, the colored highlighters he'd used tracking the path of his money as it flowed away from him. He laid out the corporate registration for Thorne Properties LLC, his brother's neat annotations in the margins. He placed Corrigan's photographs in a row, a visual narrative of the affair. And at the very end, he unrolled the architectural plans for the house in Bristol. He stood back and took a mental inventory, the way he would before starting a complex project. What he knew: she was having an affair with Marcus Thorne. They were systematically stealing his money to finance a new life together. She had left him on the floor for 6 hours, fully believing he could be dying, because her secret life was more important than his actual one. What he did not know: how he would feel when this was all over. What he controlled: the information, the evidence, the timing of the confrontation, the legal strategy. What he did not control, her reaction, the emotional chaos that was sure to come. A profound and heavy stillness settled over him. The grief was still there, a cold stone in his gut, but it was now overlaid with a layer of glacial clarity. The design of his next actions was clear. He knew what he had to build. He chose a Tuesday. The choice was deliberate, a small, symbolic act of closure. It was the same day of the week as the lie on the credit card statement. He called Alara in the morning. He kept his voice even, calm. He asked her to be home for dinner, on time. He said he wanted to discuss the vacation she had been suggesting, to finally make some plans. He heard the relief in her voice when she agreed. She thought he was finally emerging from his fog, that her careful management of his illness had been successful. He spent the afternoon preparing, not in the kitchen, but in the dining room. He cleared the table, the one he had made for her as a 5th anniversary gift, its surface a flawless expanse of polished cherry. He placed 2 chairs at opposite ends. In the center of the table, he set a single, thick manila envelope. He did not set out plates or glasses. He wanted the starkness of the scene to speak for itself. She arrived just after 6, humming a tune, a bottle of expensive wine in her hand. "I thought we could celebrate," she said, her smile bright and practiced. Then she saw the table. The smile faltered. Her eyes went from his face to the empty table, to the envelope. "Arthur, what's this?" she asked, her voice losing its cheerful lilt, becoming cautious, testing the air. He did not answer. He simply gestured to the chair opposite him. He sat down. He waited. The silence in the room stretched, growing heavier with each passing second. He let it build, letting the weight of it press on her. Finally, when the tension was a palpable thing, he reached for the envelope. He opened the clasp, his movements unhurried. He slid the first document across the polished surface.